This is an overview of the CAREER Instructional Model. This is Dick Jones, and I've had the opportunity to work with a number of educators over the last several months reflecting on an instructional model that would help to develop students toward career readiness. This is an activity of the Successful Practices Network and the Technical Assistance Center in New York State for Career and Technical Education. In this overview, I want to talk about the activities of the Successful Practices Network, what we've learned about best practices in school, and how we're continuing to share these with teachers. The Successful Practices Network has had an activity for the last 3 years working with career and technical education in New York State. This is not only helping to improve the quality of career and technical education, but help to improve all of education and what we've learned about career readiness. As a result of that, the Successful Practices Network is developing a Career Readiness Institute, which will work with schools across the country, sharing best practices and continuing to learn from one another about how we can better prepare students to be career ready. As educators, we have a good notion of what it means to be college ready, but career readiness is even more challenging and in many ways a higher expectation for students. This examination of instruction is an opportunity to think about what it takes to develop students to be career ready and the practices in the classroom that would contribute to that. In addition, we need to recognize that we need to prepare students for career readiness that focuses on the future, and that future is a very different one that is continuing to be laced with technology, increasingly complex, and demanding significant skills for students to be successful. As we prepare students to be career ready, we must focus on making sure they are ready for their future and not our past. This discussion about career readiness leads us as educators to think about our traditional tools about how we go about improving. Do we need a new test that is a career readiness assessment that we can measure student achievement? Do we add something more, increase diploma requirements to require new courses or to make existing courses more mandatory? Do we endorse another set of standards? And certainly there are a multitude of standards, not only in academic but career areas, that can lead to expectations. It's not about a new curriculum. It's about rethinking the things that we already do in our significant efforts in teaching and learning. I would argue it's not about adding anything more to better prepare students to be career ready. And it's not changing what we teach or adding new courses. It really comes from changing how we teach. And this is not about everyone embracing new instructional strategies, but recognizing within our instruction, many effective teachers are developing the skills that really do make students career ready. And it's recognizing those practices and applying those universally. We often think about the categories of instruction as simply being improvement, and the teacher evaluation has focused on that. But at the same time, we want to see about how we develop the kinds of skills that seem to exist within the margins of our curriculum and standards. The whole discussion on 21st century skills and outlined how important it is for students to learn information technology, to be creative in their work, to have strong communication skills, to be able to think critically, to be able to collaborate with one another, and to have an array of life and career skills. All of these are so important. So whatever we do, we need to include some of these kinds of skills that we label as 21st century learning. There's also been some authors that have really poked our understanding of curriculum and what's important. And one of those was Dan Pink's book several years ago on A Whole New Mind, when he talked about the complexities of the world and requiring both right brain and left brain thinkers. And while that metaphor for understanding brain research may be overly simplistic, his ideas of 6 characteristics really strike our common sense about how we know students need to be better prepared for this world, in being able to make meaning, communicate through stories, engage in creativity and design, engage in play, which is a powerful learning experience, and that we work in symphony with one another and all of the pieces relating to one another, and that we show empathy for our fellow individuals and different cultures. Another author that has challenged our thinking is Ken Robinson in his 2 books on creativity. His most recent one is Out of Our Mind, and really challenging the education establishment that it's too much about memorization of content and not stimulating students to be creative. There also is Howard Gardner's work on multiple intelligences, and his most recent book is 5 Minds for the Future, that causes us to think about preparing students for a very different world. The 5 minds he references are a creating mind, a synthesizing mind, a disciplined mind, an ethical mind, and a respectful mind. This touches on the challenges of the future, but also in our common understanding of what it really takes to be successful in this world. There are also some authors, and Dan Pink among those, that began to reveal the fundamental aspects of how challenging it is to lead students to higher levels of engagement in learning and career readiness. Dan Pink dispels some of the traditional notions of a carrot and a stick approach to motivation by explaining research that indicates there are only 3 fundamental reasons that lead to motivation. Those are: we understand the purpose of what we're doing, that we can measure our mastery in success of doing that, and have a sense of autonomy. Dan Goleman has led a lot of the exploration of social and emotional intelligence. And while Goleman's books are quite dense, there are a number of authors that have described this area of self-awareness, self-regulation, internal motivation, empathy, and social skills, which really enable individuals to be successful. And any discussion of career readiness needs to include social emotional learning. There also is a recent book by Carol Dweck called Mindset that is popular among educators, which reminds us that we need to instill in students an understanding that effort and persistence leads to success and not some innate measure of intelligence. And so certainly preparing students to be career ready needs to include this as well. We add to this mix our notion of rigor and relevance and our understanding of quadrant D learning and what's it take to get student learning to that high level of a combination of rigor and relevance. These are some of the characteristics that we talk about. We need to make sure that students are working with real-world problems and focusing on application. We need to use a backwards design approach that leads to a student performance, and we need to make sure that we are assessing for rigor and relevance at the same level of our expectations. We need to include creativity in the rigor that we expect of students. We need to create classrooms that are more student-centered, that deeply engage students in their learning if we expect to get to high rigor, high relevance. And it is about future thinking. We want students to be prepared to adapt to an ever-changing future, and that's the driving reason for moving toward Quadrant D instruction. And along with this, we want to develop a set of desirable personal skills that will enable students to apply their rigorous and relevant learning. So considering all of these efforts to describe what's important to learn and how do we develop those becomes a complicated mix for us to understand. I see some patterns in all of these statements of what can be described as career readiness learning. And I've grouped those in this table into 6 areas. The first of these relates to connecting with relevance and how important it is in instruction to emphasize relevance and to help students make connections in what they're being exposed to in their experiences. Assessment is critical, and we need to assess for proficiency and not just assess for some minimal accumulation of knowledge. We also need to emphasize and reward creativity and innovation, and making sure that we are pushing students to develop their confidence in being able to come up with creative solutions. We need to engage students as independent learners. We need to reach to each student, and we need to make sure they're prepared to go on and continue their own learning. We need to empower students with a sense of hope and confidence, that they recognize that their learning and their skills can be applied in many different ways, and that they enjoy this aspect of continued learning. And then finally, we need to focus on rating work habits and collaborative behaviors. I feel these 6 categories describe and organize a lot of the things that we read and hear and understand personally about what it takes to get students to career ready. Conveniently, these 6 categories start with the letters C-A-R-E-E-R, spelling out career, and use that as a simple label to identify what these 6 characteristics are. So these categories define what we call as an instructional model, referenced as the CAREER Instructional Model. Following this framework, it gives us an instructional model that really works. It prepares students for their future and not our past, and getting teachers to focus on making sure we're emphasizing the kinds of skills that are future-oriented for students. It addresses both college and career readiness, that I would argue that the skills represented in these 6 areas will help students to be career ready, but also to be successful in any post-secondary education experience they're involved in. As teachers strive to work toward Quadrant D of the Rigor Relevant Framework, these instructional practices will help to move students there. It also reflects what we know about brain research and the way to truly engage students in learning and to deepen their learning. It's a flexible model that can apply to any instructional area, any grade level, and accommodate the differences in individual students. It also can be data-driven, and after a little further explanation, I'll come back and talk about this important data piece. Let me spend a minute just talking about some of the action elements in each of these 6 categories. Connecting with relevance is several different aspects of helping to have students see the connection in what they are learning. We want to activate students' interest. They're going to put forth effort only when they see the connection to their own experiences. It's also about using authentic materials and not limiting ourselves to summarized textbooks, but connecting students to real materials from the real world where they can see the application of their learning. We also need to help students connect with previous knowledge. That this is what we know from brain research. Unless we help students build those connections, they're not going to retain their learning. We need to base learning experiences on real-world problems, which are often messy and ill-defined, but are really powerful in helping to build some understanding of the purpose of learning. And it's all about application. And our assessments need to focus on application of knowledge, not just the acquisition of knowledge. The second category is about assessing for proficiency, and these actions relate to some assessment practices and grading practices. The first is to make sure that we actually are assessing what is most essential to learn, and sometimes we assess what is convenient and easy rather than assessing the more complex skills which we are really expecting students to acquire. We need to engage students in the assessment process, and they need to understand the assessment criteria very clearly. When this happens, they are much more likely to produce and work toward high-quality work. Our assessments also need to be scaled for proficiency, and sometimes we scale our assessments around a percentage of questions received and even modify those ratings based upon student behaviors. It's all about getting students to proficiency, and our grading needs to be measured in that way. We also need to grade in a way that challenges students to extend their learning. Rather than students being satisfied with a particular grade and perhaps a low level of learning, our grading system needs to challenge and encourage students to go to beyond the minimum expectations. And grades are about communication and keeping parents and students informed. And so the systems that we use in grading need to be ongoing and open so that both students and parents are clear about their progress in moving toward proficiency. Reward creativity and innovation. The actions here are many that we would think about in terms of challenging students to do original work. We need to tie this also to learning. It's about discovering and developing student talents and recognizing that they have talents in many areas. Teachers need to encourage risk-taking in learning and create a safe environment where students feel comfortable trying new things and pushing their learning. And teacher feedback and support is so important in this creativity and innovation world. And teachers need to reflect on their language and the way that they provide feedback to students. Fourth category is about engagement and engaging students as independent learners. Here the actions begin with relationships. Relationships are the foundation upon which student engagement is built. Every classroom needs to have routines and procedures that students are engaged in developing and understand clearly and need to follow those routines. But too much routine can be disengaging, and teachers need to reflect on using a variety of strategies, and that the majority of those strategies are active learning, which really engage students and move them out of a passive observation mode. Engagement also demands personalization in making sure that teachers teach in a way through differentiation and attention to student needs that allow every student to succeed. And another action in this category is developing the kinds of informational and study skills that will enable students to be continued learners. In the future is not a question of just access to information, but the abilities to analyze, to study, and to obtain information that is useful, that will define students as successful. Category 5 is about empowering students with hope and confidence. This category includes actions around social emotional learning and developing those skills. Students are always confronted with emotional situations which can be challenging, and students need to have the kinds of coping skills on hand to handle those emotions and to function effectively in a social world. We need to encourage the students acquire a growth mindset. They're focused on recognizing that their effort will contribute to success. Another action is around metacognition and getting students to think about their thinking processes and engage in reflection in efforts to try and improve. We want students to develop a passion for making a difference in the world. Discovering talents and recognizing that there are values that they want to commit toward are an important part of making learning an essential part of students' future. We also need to establish a sense of caring and a sense of community. Oftentimes, education in schools provides very unique opportunities for students to move beyond their neighborhoods, both to the region and to the world, in understanding the needs and aspirations of many in other communities and how students can contribute to those wider communities. Finally, rate work habits and collaborative behaviors. Actions here include engaging the students to collaboratively identify the desirable work habits, getting students to reflect on their personal strengths and weaknesses and developing those characteristics. Teachers need to provide opportunities for students to demonstrate those work habits. If students are only sitting passively in the classroom, teachers will have little idea about students' ability to work productively. Teachers need to create collaborative activities in which they are promoting and developing collaboration skills. And then finally, teachers provide feedback on work habits. This movement in describing some of these actions gives you a little deeper understanding of what are the characteristics and dimensions of moving toward this career model. But we're also working to make this a data-driven model, true data-driven instruction, where data-driven instruction is often actually data-driven test rehearsal, just focuses on state assessments. We're looking at some data that can actually help teachers inform their instruction around these 6 elements. We've created 6 surveys around the instructional model in which teachers can rate their individual classroom. It's self-reported reflection. Teachers go through and respond to a series of questions about characteristics in their classroom, and they get a rating. Most importantly, it gives them a personalized set of suggestions about what they can do to better improve their connection with relevance, assessment for proficiency, engaging as independent learners. This can begin to drive some true professional learning where teachers are thinking about their instructional practices. We look forward to continuing to work with teachers, both in the New York State Network and nationally in the Career Readiness Institute, in how we can apply these principles of career instruction to help teachers create a classroom environment at all grade levels that helps to better prepare students to be